Hi, welcome to True Creeps, where the stories are true and the creeps are real. We'll cover stories from grotesque gore to the possibly plausible paranormal, to horrifying history, to tense and terrible true crime, and everything else that goes bump in the night. We're your hosts, Amanda.
And I'm Lindsay, and we want you to join us while we creep.
We cover mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everyone. We are going to start our episode in just a moment, but we wanted to insert a quick note to our fellow Americans due to the election results that came out today, which is November 6th.
Yes.
We're feeling a little off as we're recording next week's episode, which is True Crime Digest, and we figured a lot of you may feel the same. We didn't think it made much sense for this episode to start like something didn't just happen, and we wanted to address it in the best way we know how, which is sharing stories and knowledge. When we come back from our December break in 2025, we are going to be throwing in cases, history, and stories that shaped our country to get to where it is today. And as a note, it will not be just one-sided, as it will include different thoughts, stories, opinions, problems, all kinds of things from people with differing opinions as well.
If you're a person who is disheartened by the election results, be kind to yourself, take a pause if you need it, and then do not let yourself forget this feeling. Make yourself a voice memo, write a journal entry, sit in stillness for a second and let yourself feel the weight of this. Because I don't know about you, but I'm tired of fucking feeling this way.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like either party, aren't you tired of fucking feeling this way? Feeling like the world's going to end because your political candidate didn't fucking win? It should not feel this way.
Ever.
Ever. Ever.
Not just this year. Yeah.
Not just this year, not last election. We should never feel this way. We so thoroughly believe it is possible for there to be a version of America that could exist where we aren't struggling for basic rights, where children aren't being shot where they should be being educated, where parents aren't struggling to house and feed their children, where we are not worried about the rights that are very important to us being stripped away, where you aren't deciding whether you can afford medical care because it's so expensive you might go bankrupt. So some people go without important medications, procedures, sometimes life-saving.
Or they put it off.
Or they put it off and it gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
We should not be living this way. There's no reason for us to be living this way. Our forefathers could not conceptualize the world that we live in today. They thought of a lot of great things. No doubt about it. They did. But they could not even conceptualize the size of corporations that we have today, the way that private citizens are hoarding wealth in corporations, and the technology as we have it, but also the impact that it would have on us and our surroundings. So it's up to us to work to build the world that we want to see. We can start with those principles that they gave us, and we should, right? That's why we like America, you know? Constitution, Declaration of Independence, we're pretty fond of it. But I think everyone agrees that it doesn't encompass everything.
Mm-hmm.
We want it to be for us, as it should be. We genuinely believe that most Americans, regardless of political affiliation, want to live in a country where we feel safe and have our basic needs met. And we think that we can get there. And we also just know that working toward the best version of our home is not something that should be reserved for election years. It should be part of what we do every day. And if it's important, it's important. So the only way we can think to move forward is with action. Again, whether you're happy with the election results or not, we are all a part of making our home a better place. So we look forward to doing that with you next year. And with that, here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Today is a continuation of our spirit photography episode.
Yeah.
It had a particular story that kind of needed its own episode.
Yeah, because it quickly became the star of the other episode. And we also needed to talk about it more.
Yes. We had to dissect it a little bit more.
Amanda had a name for it, and I was like, no, it's Florence and the Ghost instead of Florence and the Machine.
Perfect. I loved it.
Florence and the Ghost. I was like, beautiful.
You don't have to listen to the first spirit photography episode to understand everything in this, other than people were always interested in spirit photography like we are today.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to dive right in. Another type of photography that didn't even cross my mind to look at, but is kind of spooky, was the invention of the X-ray in 1895. Was that a consideration to you?
No, because in my head, that wasn't a photo. Of fucking course it's a photo. It's an image. But I was like, mind fucking blown.
Yes. And like your skeleton's scary, right? It's spooky.
Yeah, it is.
So very soon after it was invented, people started to associate them with death, spirits, and the occult, which is cool because you don't really see medical stuff overlap with that very often, other than like after someone's dead already. But like,
I will say that when you look at medical instruments from other periods in time,
oh, they're terrifying.
they are horror adjacent.
Yes.
But not when they are the current technology.
Yes. Yes. In this next part, I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it this way, but I do love it. Spiritualists used the X-ray as a confirmation that the visible world was simply a veil and that it hides a deeper and invisible spiritual reality. And like, how true is that with an X-ray? Because on the surface level, when we're looking at each other, we don't see a skull or bones or anything. But this particular form of photography can show something that you can't visually see.
Yeah.
So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there type mentality. And I love it.
When this all still seems like fucking magic.
Mm-hmm.
This is during a time period when popular religion and spirituality / spiritualism / magic, witchcraft, all that could exist together.
Yes.
So you weren't like a bad Christian if you believed in the occult necessarily.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like, it was very common for people to watch seances and like attend different spooky things. And it wasn't looked at as they were being weird. It was just, this is interesting. This is an interesting topic.
People were like, I miss my people. It was seen as a way to connect with loved ones, not as like spooky, which oftentimes today when people are seeking out mediums and things like that, it is for that same reason. It is still to connect with somebody who they love.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that the world's such a different place and people like to add moral things to things that are unnecessary.
Right. Right. So going back to the X-ray, how the X-ray was discovered isn't what we're going to be talking about, but kind of someone that played a big part in it. So it was discovered because of a chemist, physicist named William Crookes, and he created something called a Crookes tube. And so that was part of how an X-ray was discovered, is his first discovery helped with the invention.
So he is scientific as fuck. Yeah?
He is scientific as fuck. Yes.
Scientific as fuck. An official title.
Let me tell you how scientific this dude is. So,
okay, let's go.
He also discovered the element thallium.
Oh.
Do I know what that is? Nope. But I know it's science, right? It's on the periodic table. I heard someone, I don't know, maybe it was a TikTok or something, saying to a teacher, like, are you allowed to have a Breaking Bad poster up in your room? And it was the periodic table.
Oh, that hurts.
I love it. I laugh so hard, especially because one of our friends is a chemistry teacher.
Yeah.
And he dressed up as Walter White once for Halloween. So
gorgeous.
William Crookes also identified plasma as one of the 4 fundamental states of matter and much more.
Fuck yeah. So he's for realsies.
He's for realsies a scientist, right? And during his research and work, he loved to incorporate photography into it. So that's kind of where we get the photo element, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even more fun to talk about, his research was influenced by his interest in spiritualism. And he also seemed to be a big fan of William Hope, one of the photographers we talked about a while back, spirit photographers. And he liked that he was able to do that. So kind of fun that he's sciencey and spooky at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. So, okay, we're shifting to our spiritualism time. I love it. Crooke was involved in the testing of a medium named Florence Cook. We're going to call her Florence. But sometimes she's referred to as Flory, which is the fucking cutest thing I've ever heard in my life.
It is. It is.
Now, when you think of a medium, you probably, like many people, think a person who can talk to spirits, if you believe in that kind of thing, right?
Right.
But have you ever heard of somebody who could materialize a full body spirit? Because that's what Florence could do. Holy fuck. It sounds unbelievable.
Right. And after researching what we're going to talk about, I kept thinking, like, if I were present in any of these, how unnerving but fascinating, and like all the feelings that I would feel watching this unfold. So cool.
My brain breaks the idea of it, but I'm like, wow. Fucking wow. And so not only could she materialize a full body apparition, but it was the same one over and over and over again. And the spirit was known as Katie King. Florence would be able to materialize Katie when she was in a trance. But it is important to note that, so if you're thinking of a trance, you're thinking the person is there but not there, right? They're meditating, if you will.
Yeah.
Trance, meditating, they're similar. Katie King, we're going to call her Katie from now on, was Florence's spirit guide.
Mm-hmm. And I love the thought of a spirit guide. I love all the books that talk about it and like
Yes.
contracts and all of that. I love it.
Yes. And so if you're thinking of a spirit guide, I want you to think about somebody who a person talks to and has a close relationship with. So while she was able to materialize Katie, it wasn't as though Katie's interactions were only with other people. Her and Florence also had like a deep friendship.
Yeah.
And what's even more strange is so we've got a medium who can materialize a whole ass apparition. But what makes it weirder is that this is not the first time that Katie's been around.
Yes.
Katie King had a substantive history before being associated with Florence. So we're in like the late 1800s, early 1900s during this, okay? Katie was said to appear during seances in the 1850s in London and possibly other places, but we'll get to that. She was also said to have lived under the name Annie Owen Morgan when she was alive, and that she was the daughter of a pirate named Henry Morgan. Now, people had also communicated with him in his afterlife, and he had gone by the name John King. So I think this is kind of sweet. Katie took the name of her father in the afterlife. So she's Katie King because of her dad changing his name.
Yes. And like, he's been associated with a lot of this as well. We're not going to so much focus on his backstory today, but in a lot of seances and stuff, he did make an appearance. And we'll talk about one instance, but he has a big story too.
Yeah. And when she was alive, Annie, or Katie, was a quote, self-professed liar, cheat, and adulteress. Okay, I love this for her. She's like, I'm doing whatever the fuck I want. Okay, man, do it. But she did die in her 20s. And I feel like your 20s, you're like figuring out how to be a person, right? Like you're figuring out how to be an adult, have relationships where you're not accidentally hurting other people, but you're still prioritizing yourself. It's a messy time. I don't care what era we're in. I think that it should be a messy time in everybody's life. So Katie made it her mission when she was dead to prove to the world the truth about spiritualism and to prove the talents of some mediums, one being Florence. Okay, you know I don't like ghosts who are working, but I love a ghost with a mission.
That is cool, yeah.
Also one that's like, I want you guys to know what the fuck is going on.
And that I exist still.
Yeah. And like, I'm going to make it irrefutable.
Yes.
I'm going to get a scientist, baby. That's what she said. That's what Katie said. It'll make sense later. So let's talk a little about Florence in particular first. Florence claimed as a child that she could hear the voices of angels.
And that's a common thing that people talk about still today. I love it and I'm fascinated in it, but I was always like, oh gosh, please don't be talking to something that I don't know. I can't see things on a baby monitor, you know, like please don't do that.
No, don't do that. You're like, can you just do it when I'm around? Don't make me be like, what's that voice in the baby monitor?
Yeah.
Why are you giggling by yourself?
Oh my gosh. When we had to shop for a baby monitor, I was stressed. I was like, I'm going to see something and we're going to have to move.
Well, we also talked about in a recent episode a not ghostly thing that somebody saw on a baby monitor, that they saw child abuse.
Yeah.
Fucking wild.
Ugh, yeah. Not a fan of baby monitors. It scared me. But once we were done with the baby monitor, I was so relieved. So Florence, as a child, she's talking to angels, right? Her psychic gifts began to manifest around the age 15. And it was when she levitated a piece of furniture during a table tilting session with her friends.
As one does.
As one does. Now, the table was said to levitate 4 feet off of the ground, or I've seen in some sources that it was Florence that was levitating. So just depending on the source, but something was levitating that shouldn't have been levitating, right? And for those that are like, what the hell is table tilting? It is very interesting. I was actually looking at a tour that talked about it recently, and it was funny that it came up in research this week too. But table tilting was sort of like a Ouija board situation, but using a table instead. And it was a type of seance where people would sit around the table, they'd all place their hands on it, and the table would sort of move. And whenever you look up like pictures of seances, especially around Halloween time or right after Halloween time, a lot of them are a picture of people doing table tilting. And you never really thought about it until, you know, looking into it. But what would happen is a piece of the table itself, something would levitate or move. And then what you would do is you'd create a code with the spirits to communicate. But it was insanely time consuming. So for instance, you could say like 1 table knock meant yes, 2 meant no. Or if you want to use it like a Ouija board, 1 table knock for A, twice for B, and so on.
This sounds exhausting. This is also when people talk about spiritualism and the showmanship of it, this is where this kind of comes into play with the knocking, because there's a lot of things that could create a knocking sound, right? You can create mechanisms to do that. You could have someone in a closet that you can't see, you know what I mean, that is hidden. And so when you're talking about knocking, it's a little bit different. But when you're talking about a table levitating, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I also just want to say that the idea of being like having to go through each letter sounds exhausting. And if you're talking about lifting tables for like proof of a spirit, that sounds like it would be a lot of energy.
Yeah, it would be hard.
Yeah.
And so like skeptics to the Ouija board, they claimed that it was all unconscious muscular actions by the people that were participating in the seance. But others were like, how did some of those people answer these questions when there's no way they could have known the answer to it?
Yeah.
So interesting. Kind of like the Ouija board, like some instances may be faked, but I don't know about all of them. Anyways, back to Florence. She continued to do seances in her home, and she could also do something with what they called a spirit cabinet. And this would involve her being tied up willingly to a chair and put into a cabinet of sorts. And this cabinet would either have a hole cut way up like on the door, or it would be closed with a curtain. There's a lot of different descriptions of what a spirit cabinet would look like. And in particular, Florence's, there's not a lot. But how a spirit cabinet worked in essence.
They're fucking weird.
They are fucking weird.
I would just tell you, of all the ways in which to test someone's mediumship, never in my mind would I be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take an armoire. We're going to cut a hole in it. We're going to tie someone up. We're going to blindfold them. We're going to cover them in a sheet. Then we're going to make a little tiny curtain, put it in. That's how we're going to test them. I'm like,
yep. Okay.
Okay. I mean, again, we're doing the most.
We are. We're doing a lot. So imagine, a big fucking cabinet where someone could get inside of it and be tied to a chair. And then I'm not sure where the curtain was with hers. I've seen some that said like it was up high in the cabinet door, but I've also seen that a whole curtain closed the cabinet. So I'm a little confused on her particular one. There's many different types of spirit cabinets I've found, but some mediums would even just have a whole room or maybe a corner of a room that would curtain off, or even sometimes a doorway. But hers was some sort of cabinet. For Florence's seances, onlookers sometimes would even sing hymns to like set the mood of the seance.
So again, the overlap of Christianity with this, because hymns is a Christian song, typically, right? Or a religious song.
Yes. So then they would have someone typically check to make sure she was still in the cabinet, tied to the chair, right? Think of like a magician too. And magicians played a big role in this era too. I didn't think about it until recently, like the overlap there. But anyways, after they checked, what they would start seeing is faces appear either through the hole or behind the curtain or coming out of the curtain. Remember, it was like a thin veilish curtain. And so they'd see faces and then they would disappear and the door would be opened. And then it would show Florence exhausted from allowing the spirits to use her energy to appear. So she's sitting in the cabinet. People are starting to see faces coming up in the veil or curtain, but she's tied to a chair. So how could she be doing all the stuff, right?
Yeah.
Some were super convinced this is spirits. She's manifesting spirits. This is for realsies. Others were like, it's like a magician's trick. She can untie herself quickly, move her face around, and then tie herself back up quickly before we have a chance to walk over there and look.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Like you said, it's doing a lot to prove the essence of spirits, right?
Yes. It's also, she is doing this in a way that is boldly more powerful than a lot of other people at the time. So she's doing it in a way that would invite scrutiny.
Yes, agreed.
And you would think that if you were like really not real, maybe you would just want to fly in the middle, be like good enough, but not the best. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't know. I just feel like I would do less if I was lying.
Yeah, that's true, right? And so the use of a spirit cabinet wasn't first used by Florence. The Davenport brothers, which is another big name in this whole time frame, with the help of their spirit guide, John King, sound familiar? And the suggestion from an audience member at one of their seances, they created the spirit cabinet in the 1850s. And I've also seen that they may have gotten the idea from a combination of places, so not just the two I've discussed. John Coons and his family were also a big name during this time, and they created something called a spirit room after being ordered to do so by spirits. The Coons family was likely also inspired by this next one, and that's the famous Fox sisters, and you may have heard of them before. They claimed that they can communicate with the dead in the late 1840s. So between all of these people, she was able to get her spirit cabinet going.
And we actually talked about them in our original Ghost episode. We had a little section on spiritualism.
Yep. Yeah, I was like, I know the name has popped up.
Also, episode 3.
We love episode 3.
We love episode 3.
But their name comes up a lot if you look up spiritualism.
Oh, yeah.
Fox Sisters is a really big one. Davenport Brothers is a big one. I hadn't really heard of the Coons family very much, but after reading a bit of their story, like, it totally makes sense.
Absolutely. So people flocked to see Florence's abilities. And you would think perhaps it's just because of the wondrous things she could do. Of course not. We can't have anything fucking interesting and good without people being fucking creepy.
Yeah. Sometimes
spirits would toss her in the air, and on one occasion, they ripped off her clothing. And so these occasions may have been before she was doing the seances at home, because before that, she was doing them at the Dalston Society, and that's where we think it may have gotten to be a bit too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe her mom stepped in and was like, maybe we should just do these at home.
Absolutely. So Florence worked at a school at the time, and I can't even imagine, like, nowadays being able to be a full-ass person with, like, intense spiritual beliefs that are public.
Yeah.
While working. Like, that just, like, in a public setting like that. And with children involved, people would not have it. But so some of the girls at the school were unsettled by, quote, Miss Cook's spirits, which is sad.
Yeah.
And the parents didn't want anything to happen while they were there. So she was ultimately let go from the school, which is very sad because she's doing this other thing. Presumably, not just for herself, right? She's making money from it, but not enough where she could quit her day job, clearly.
At first, at least.
Like, if she's making enough as a medium, she wouldn't be like, I'm going to still be a teacher, but you know. So, we get to 1872, and during one of her cabinet events, a face appears and announced that it was Katie King. And so, as time went on and as the seances continued, more and more of Katie began to appear. Eventually, her entire body could be seen wrapped in a thin white cloth. This happened over and over and over again. So once she fully materialized, she came back.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, it would take as long as 30 minutes. The curtain would part and the figure of Katie would emerge. Usually, she was dressed in white and looked pale. And people presumed that Florence was still in the cabinet unconscious. Sometimes onlookers would hear Florence sobbing or moaning inside the cabinet. It's also interesting the idea of calling her unconscious when she's in a trance, because there's no reason why she should necessarily be unconscious.
Right.
But it could be that she's meditating so intensely that it seems as though she is. But either way. So, at first, Katie would only smile and nod from a distance. But after a few more appearances, she started walking around and talking to the guest. She became an attraction. Not surprising at all. And people would travel to come see her. But some people thought that she looked a lot like Florence. And I think it's fascinating that she was kind of a flirt. She would be flirting with people. She's sitting on people's laps.
Mm-hmm.
She is out, living it up, taking in the attention.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, that was not Florence's personality at all.
Yes, agreed.
So on December 9th of 1873, a lawyer named William Volkman, lots of Williams, was invited to one of the seances with some of his friends. He saw a lot of similarities between Florence and Katie immediately, and it kind of pissed him off. So he got super duper angry. He grabbed Katie as she was interacting with some of the other guests, and he grabbed her arm and then held her at her waist.
Ew.
And then he started screaming out that it was just Florence in a disguise. Now, Katie managed to get away. She scratched him in kind of like a fight to get freed. Also, Florence's fiance at the time was present, Edward Corner, and he helped along with some of the friends of the Cook family that were present to like help her get free.
Yeah.
A lot of people also believe that it might have been dangerous to interfere with the apparition, especially if they were being materialized through another person, like maybe causing that link to go away or harm the person. They weren't sure. But I did think that was interesting because Katie was said to interact with guests and like sit on their lap and stuff. So like, was there a limit?
Maybe it's like stripper rules. They can touch you, but you can't touch them.
Maybe.
It's one thing to be touching. Interfering is like holding you.
Right.
You can't get up and go back should you want to.
And a lot more emotion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe to change that link.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, he grabbed her. She got away. Now, one of the guests that were present said that the spirit then vanished out of thin air from the feet upward. That's what they remember seeing. Now, Volkman stormed into the other room where the cabinet was, opened up the door, opened the curtain, and he sees Florence still tied up. But they did note her hair and clothing were a little messed up. They were a little disheveled.
Yeah, but keep in mind that during these, people had said she was moaning and sobbing, so it's not altogether strange that she might be thrashing about.
Possibly. Now, this event created two sides. People that very much believed in Florence's abilities, and then a lot more skeptics. Florence decided that she needed to prove herself. So she contacted our sciencey friend, William Crookes.
You know, the guy who helped invent the X-ray.
Yes.
A science guy.
Right. A piece of the X-ray, but he did find the element. He's a science guy. People really respected him.
Maybe he was your favorite scientist's favorite scientist. He was that level of scientist.
Yes. Yes. So people really, really trusted him because he was so accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
He had also recently lost his brother, and that gave him a bigger interest in psychical research because of it. Now, he was stoked to work with Florence. He's like, yeah, we're gonna do sciencey things to prove that this is real.
Who fucking wouldn't be? So William invited Florence to come stay at his home with his wife and his children.
Yes.
Good to know. Hey, come live with... It's weirder if he's single, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Ish.
Yeah.
Ish.
I mean, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll get there. So William had already built a room designed to conduct tests and experiments under controlled conditions. Because again, like I said earlier, and like Amanda mentioned, a lot of spiritualists were building their own spaces. So fair that to make sure that there was nothing afoot, you would create the space. One of the experiments he did was to have Florence lay down on a couch behind a curtain and wrap a shawl around her face. And the shawl was thought to protect her from the lights. Then Katie appeared in front of the curtain, so separate from her. William checked to make sure that Florence was still laying down on the couch. And she was, but she had the shawl on her face, so he couldn't make sure it was Florence underneath. Mm-hmm. It could have just been someone there. Interesting. Another test included an electrical setup. Florence was placed with an electric circuit connected with a resistance coil and a galvanometer. Hoping I said it right. Anyway, the movements of the meter were shown in the other room where other people were watching. If she moved the wires, the meter would have fluctuated. Supposedly, nothing suspicious ever showed during the test. Additionally, at one point, they had Katie put her hands in a chemical solution, which if the wires had been on her, it would have caused an increase in electrical current.
Interesting. Very sciencey way to do this.
Yeah, it's all science, you know? So, since the meter never changed, William said that it indicated that the hands placed in the chemical solution could not have belonged to Florence.
Interesting.
Yes. William also reported that Florence was able to manifest Katie during these experiments, even when she was bound not only with her normal rope knots, but also with tape and rope and knots sealed with wax. So the wax would have cracked if it had been untied.
Right. And there was a variety of experiments. We just focused on a couple, but there's a lot done.
Yeah. He also said that at one point, Katie even walked him over to see Florence while she was in a trance on the floor.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I find it strange that she was able to make it to the floor if they kept tying her up, because then like the couch situation seemed like she wasn't tied up. So it seems like sometimes she was and sometimes she wasn't.
I would imagine that he started with her on a couch, laying there with a shawl on her face, and then increased them in severity, right? Because like, why do a very rigorous scientific test if she can't even pass a basic one?
That's fair. So he mentioned that the two women, so Katie and Florence, did look similar, but there were also a lot of differences. For instance, Katie was taller than Florence. Florence had dark hair, and Katie's was a golden auburn. Florence also tended to bite her nails, but when he looked at Katie's nails, they seemed to appear normal, so not bitten off.
There was even a part where Florence was sick, like she had chest congestion, and he listened to her chest with a stethoscope, and he listened to Katie's chest, and it was clear.
That's interesting.
It was like within a few hours of one another. And like that she was like a foot taller, right? Like not just a little, she was like one human head taller, if you will, is kind of how he described it. But I was like, that's not 2 inches.
How many 12-year-old boys though?
Oof, I don't know. Human head is like, what, like 10 inches. That's what, almost 1/5 of a 12-year-old boy. I don't even need a fucking calculator anymore. That's how like much of a...
This is the most proud she's ever been.
I was just like, I was going to say a 12-year-old boy mathematician, but I do not want that title. That sounds like something you would get in a lot of trouble for. And I just like their height. That's not weird at all.
You know what's funny is if someone has found us recently and we're always talking about 12-year-old boys but has no idea why.
Please, it's in our Lake Lanier episode. Somebody measured something with a 12-year-old boy.
Yes, that's where it came from. Any newbies? That's what happened. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there were differences. Very strange. Now, William published his findings in a report in 1874. In the report, he said, quote, I have the most absolute certainty that Miss Cook and Katie are two separate individuals so far as their bodies are concerned.
Okay.
Okay, he knows their bodies. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during his tests, he used 5 cameras and was able to capture 55 photos.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also why we had it in our spirit photography episode originally, is because we were talking a lot about photos.
Yes.
Now, there are rumors that some of these photos still may be out there today. However, a lot of them seem to have been destroyed along with the negatives. And I've seen 2 different times, either right before William died in 1919, or some sources said that his heirs destroyed them after his death. But I have seen some sources claim that they're out there, and we've seen a few of them online.
Yeah.
But also, I saw one source that claimed to even maybe have one of them, and I was like, ooh.
Let us see.
But they didn't talk anything more, so just interesting. The photos are not great quality, but there are some of him standing next to Katie and then standing next to Florence. And one even may have showed Katie and Florence together, but Florence was kind of slumped over and still in her trance. Also, again, didn't look like she was tied up in this photo. And in that photo, too, you can't really see Katie's face at all. It's covered. It's under like a white sheet of sorts. So hard to tell who's who, or like if there's a different person, who could know. Now, his report just fueled both sides of the argument, whether they were believers or skeptics.
I think that's fair, because I think that either way, you're either like, they fooled a man of science, or you're like, a man of science proved it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the two, technically, but is it? So Florence also announced that Katie was preparing to go for good, and there were several seances for people to say goodbye. What's really interesting is that when you read William's account of things, he says that from the very beginning, Katie was very clear that she would be there for 3 years.
Yeah.
And she was like true to her word. So the book Mystical Forces by Camille Flammarion, which was published in 1909, included details about William's experiences with, quote, Miss Cook and Katie. Isn't it interesting how he calls Florence Miss Cook, even though she's living with him, knows his family? Like, he knows her, but she's Miss Cook.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Katie is Katie.
He likes Katie.
He likes Katie. So he recounts that before Katie left, she and William spent some time alone in the cabinet together, and that they closed a little curtain thing so nobody could see in.
Where was Florence?
And there's no accounts of what they talked about. And have you seen the memes that are like, find yourself someone who looks at you like this dog looks at like a plate of lasagna?
Of course, yeah.
Find yourself someone who writes about you the way that William writes about Katie. Ahem.
But photography is as inadequate to depict the perfect beauty of Katie's face as words are powerless to describe her charms of manner. Photography may indeed give a map of her countenance, but how can it reproduce the brilliant purity of her complexion or the ever-varying expression of her most mobile features? Now overshadowed with sadness when relating some of the bitter experiences of her past life, not smiling with all the innocence of a happy girlhood when she had collected my children round her and was amusing them by recounting anecdotes of her adventures in India.
Sir, that doesn't sound like science. Also, earlier we said golden auburn hair. That was his description of her. Golden auburn hair.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good description, but sir?
Right. And what was Katie's? Just dark.
Yeah. So William explained that after he and Katie had some cabinet time, she walked over to Florence where she was lying on the floor in a trance, leaned over and said, "Wake up, Flory, wake up. I must leave you now." And after Florence woke up, she begged Katie to stay. And Katie responded, "My dear, I can't. My work is done. God bless you." And so they talked for a few minutes. And then one of the things they did talk about during their cabinet time was that Katie asked William to help care for Flory because she knew she would be upset and to like help calm her down. So after Katie and Florence talked for a little bit, eventually Florence couldn't even talk because she was crying so hard. And William came over and like consoled her, and he was talking to her, and then he looks up and Katie's gone. Presumably William is heartbroken. Afterwards, Florence took some time off to spend time with her new husband, Elgie Horner, and you don't really hear much about her spiritualist life after that.
Not for a while.
Not for a bit.
But it's the same guy that freed Katie when the other man had grabbed her. So they ended up getting married.
Yeah.
Now she's taken time off. Well, in Philadelphia, Katie appeared to come out of a spirit cabinet again, but this was with different people. She appeared in Nelson and Jenny Holmes' apartment. The couple's assistant announced that it was the same Katie from London. Almost immediately, Katie and the Holmes couple got super popular in the US. They started selling out 2 seances a night, and they charged $1 per person. There were also photos taken and shown to people at a price. Additionally, this is very sad, there was a kidnapping of a 4-year-old named Charlie Ross in Philadelphia around this time. People were like, we got someone that is totally going to help us with this. And this is the couple and Katie, because, you know, they're mediums and Katie's Katie. They're going to help us. Well, the 3 of them did not seem interested and did not help.
Of course not.
Which caused some people to be a little more skeptical. They're like, wait a minute, why wouldn't they help us find this kid? Like, this is important.
One of the things that people think with this kind of stuff, that you can force whatever you're interacting with to do what you want and to act on a dime. And it's not surprising that they aren't like, and now we're going to fight all crime. Not that they shouldn't help.
Right. And sometimes mediums can help with stuff like that, while others aren't really in tune to that part of it.
Yeah.
But anyways, there's going to be more with them. So newspapers started to question why they weren't helping. And more skeptics started talking about why Katie seemed to look a little different than she did in London. For instance, she aged a few years.
Interesting.
She also did not have the same accent of someone who would have lived 200 years ago. So the US people are like, I'm not buying the story. Well then, in January of 1875, a woman named Eliza White comes forward. And she says the couple had hired her at $2 a show to play Katie. Now, before she came out to tell her story, she actually tried to extort the couple for more money. And when they wouldn't give her more money, she decided to go to the press with her story.
Interesting.
So I think they were like, oh, look at how much money she made. She's taking time off. Perhaps we could steal the idea of Katie and make some money off of it.
Yeah. I mean, what an idea. So although Katie was shown to not appear in the US, people still were unsure of what was happening in London. Again, William was a smart man. How could he be fooled? Some people speculate that he was so upset about his brother's passing that he wanted to prove that spiritualism was real, so he was incredibly biased. Or maybe that she charmed him enough that she was able to trick him. Others believe he faked it because he was having an affair with her. He wasn't writing about Florence that way.
He wasn't. But at the same time, I want to say his wife was like super pregnant with like their 10th kid or something. So it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I mean, again, I said he was married. My dude. My fucking dude.
And then Florence had a fiance.
Yeah. And also, I mean, presumably, he's a wealthy doctor. If that's what she wanted, you know, and not to prove herself. Anyway, Florence began doing seances again in 1880 and materialized a new spirit named Marie. But like the other altercation that Katie had had, a man named Sir George Sitwell noticed something strange in Marie's clothes and grabbed her. He held on and then went to look at Florence's chair, which was empty. She later claimed that her powers were disappearing and she didn't want to upset her followers. After this, Florence would only do seances if someone was tied up with her to prove she didn't get up. Interesting.
Yeah.
A woman named Florence Marriott was tied to her during one of the seances and said that she was tied to Florence the entire time. But despite this, her following started to dim down and she gave her last seance in 1899. She agreed to do it under test conditions in Berlin. Marie materialized and it was said to be a really great showing. Then, 5 years later, Florence died in 1904. Katie has come up a few times in seances over the years, including in 1903 in Canada and in Rome in 1974.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yes, it is.
So with that being said, what do you think? Do you think Florence was telling the truth and she was able to materialize Katie? Or do you think the whole thing was a hoax?
I do not think it was a hoax. I'll explain more in a second, but I want to know what you think.
So I think she may have had some abilities. And the thing that we didn't really bring up is, as far as the theories go, she had a sister or maybe two. And some think like, oh, maybe it was her sister or maybe it was someone else.
Mm-hmm.
The method of doing it is very strange to me still, even knowing that it was like a common practice. Maybe it's just too foreign to us to think of doing something that way. Like that's a lot.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that they looked similar. But I mean, photos can be deceiving how tall or short someone is too. So I'm like perfectly in the middle. I think maybe she did have some abilities. I don't know if she was materializing Katie the whole time, but it did seem like their personalities were wildly different. And the thought of having a spirit guide, I do truly think of stuff like that. And I think people have the ability to communicate with spirit guides and perhaps know things that there's no way of them knowing. So again, I'm like firmly in the middle.
Okay. So I think she was a tulpa.
Ooh, okay.
I think she is one of the earliest instances of a fucking tulpa.
I love that.
And hear me out on this, because When you are thinking tulpa creation, we're talking intense meditation, right? Tulpas, we've got a full episode on tulpas. We've got a full episode on tulpamancy. This is not going to substitute for that. But if you have listened to those episodes, you are visualizing this person, right? Their details, everything about them, all of these things. Is it possible that she was a medium and communicated with Katie King? Abso-fucking-lutely. Is it possible that she took those things that she knew about Katie King and visualized her and thought about her and manifested her in the world as a tulpa, as a unique thought form and creature?
I love this idea.
Perhaps. Now, does that mean that the Katie King that she knew as her spirit guide that existed in not the physical world is the same one that she pulled through into the physical world? Or did she create the one in the physical world? I don't fucking know. But think about this. Father John King, he was one of the spirits that came through with Jenny Holmes in that seance in 1875.
Mm-hmm.
John King was Helena Blavatsky's thought form. We talked about Helena Blavatsky in our Tulpa episode. She is, for all intents and purposes, the mother of this theosophy movement, which is where our modern ideas of tulpas come from, which is a mixture of Tibetan Buddhism and theosophy. So the original ideas that we have about thought forms and the ability to manifest beings from our thoughts, the person who made that up, that thought form, was theoretically the father of Katie.
That's so bizarre. Like, that's cool that it just like wrapped around.
Mindfuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. If you're thinking, so original writings on tulpas as we think about them today came out in 1929.
Mm-hmm.
This is like over 30 years before this ever happened. So it's just so fucking interesting to me. When we think about spirits and we think about what people see and how manifesting works, like a full apparition, is it possible she was doing something fully separate? And furthermore, if you're thinking that astral projection happens when you're asleep, she was projecting her thought form from the astral plane while she was asleep because she was a fucking sleep, not simply meditating or in a trance. Good day. Good day.
I love it.
And a cherry on top.
Another thing, I mean, you bring up a good point if they were sort of connected in any way outside of, tulpa, because I actually do love that idea.
Yeah.
But also, if someone gets into that state where they're allowing someone to take over, in a sense.
Yes.
Perhaps that's what she was doing. So in her mind, she wasn't lying. She was still there.
Yes.
In her cabinet. But maybe Katie took over and has a whole different personality. And maybe the hair color did look a little different. Or maybe she was a little bit taller because she stood up straighter. Or, like whatever it may be.
Oh, absolutely. A full head taller. I mean, when you're thinking of it like that, it could even be dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah.
Where she, again, abso-fucking-lutely, I mean, either one, she's possessed, possible, or she has dissociative identity disorder and this altar is fully different. And when she stands up taller, she's closer to the light. So it looks like she's golden hair and you can see it better. And you can see the red in her hair because she's closer to the light.
Yeah, that could be.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about like sometimes people are like, okay, I can write when a spirit's having me write.
My brain hurts thinking about all this.
They can have a spirit talk through them in certain instances.
Mm-hmm.
What if? Yeah, she was just being taken over and allowing it to happen and not knowing that she was anywhere else, in a sense.
Yeah.
Right? She was in the weird trance state. So there's so many different theories. I love all of them, though.
I do, too. And I think that this is one of my favorite episodes that we've ever done, where we're talking about mediumship and ghosts, because it's like, well, fuck. We have so many witnesses.
Yes.
So she was either one hell of a fucking showman or ... question mark.
Yes. And something that I kind of hinted towards at the beginning is this era is also when magic started getting really popular. So like names like Houdini and things like that were tightly interwoven in this. I want to say that Houdini even proved some wrong and like was like, I'm good at this. I know when someone's deceiving us.
Yes.
But a lot of people saw magic and saw spiritualism and is like, oh, one and the same. And then some people were like, no, that's like a trick that they're able to pull on you without you knowing. So it's just interesting that a lot of the skeptics are like, it's the same time frame when magic's getting popular. So it's a sleight of hand in a way.
I find it so fascinating, though.
Yeah,
I really do love it.
I do, too. So, of course, with all of that being said, we want to know what you think. Had you heard of this before? And do you think that Florence and Katie are two separate people?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or do you think it was a hoax and why?
Yes. Or do you think she's a thought form?
Yes. I love it. I love all of them. I can't wait to hear what people say.
I love all of them. Me too.
So with that, we hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks for creeping with us. Thanks for listening. And as always, a special thank you to our patrons who support us via Patreon.
Please see the link in our show notes to learn more about how you, yes you, can begin to haunt the dump, guard vortexes, or even become a scorching Sasquatch.
Ooh. Also in our show notes, you can find the link to our website, more information on our sources, our social media handles, and our merch store.
We'd love for you to keep creeping with us. So if you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with your fellow creeps and or ghosts.
I beg of you. Hi, TT. Welcome to True Creeps. It's all science, you know?